In the summer of 2011, Blake Shelton was the biggest new voice in country music, a towering 6'5" presence filling arenas across America with a grin so wide it could sell anything. But behind that effortless Oklahoma charm, he was drinking himself into blackouts most nights. His marriage was disintegrating in silence. And the boy who had once sung at funerals just to feel something was now standing on the biggest stages in the world, feeling absolutely nothing at all. There is an irony in Blake Shelton's story that hurts too much to be coincidence. The child who grew up in a town so small that everybody knew your name, but nobody could save you from your grief. The teenager who picked up a guitar and discovered that music could drown out the sound of a world that had already taken too much from him. The man who built an empire on laughter, on easy confidence, on the illusion that nothing could touch him. All of that, so that life would circle back decades later and begin stripping away every person he loved, every identity he had constructed, every wall he had built to keep the pain from getting in. How does a boy from Ada, Oklahoma, population 14,000, become one of the most recognizable voices on American television? What was hiding behind those endless jokes, that bottomless glass, that persona so carefully crafted, it fooled even the people closest to him? And what happens when a man whose entire survival strategy was built on never showing weakness is finally forced to his knees by losses he cannot laugh away? To understand all of that, we need to go back to the beginning, to a small house in Ada, Oklahoma, to the early summer of 1976, and to a boy who learned, in the cruelest way possible, that love and loss arrive in the same breath. Blake Tollison Shelton was born on June 18, 1976, in Ada, Oklahoma, a quiet town in the Pontotoc County lowlands where the air smelled of red dirt and cut grass, and the horizon stretched flat in every direction like a promise, with nothing behind it. His father, Richard Shelton, owned and operated a used car lot, a man of few words and calloused hands who worked 6 days a week under the punishing Oklahoma sun. His mother, Dorothy, was a beauty salon owner with a laugh that carried through walls and a fierce, protective love that bordered on ferocity. There was no luxury in the Shelton household, no music industry connections, no recording studio in the garage. But there was something more powerful than all of that. There was a child who felt the world too intensely. Blake was the youngest of 3 children, and from the moment he could speak, he was performing. Not for attention, though the attention came. He performed because something inside him needed to push sound outward the way other children needed to run. His mother recognized it first, enrolling him in singing and acting lessons before he turned 8. By 12, he was entering talent competitions across Oklahoma, a lanky kid with a voice too deep for his age and eyes that already carried a strange, knowing sadness beneath the humor he wore like armor. His older brother, Richie, was his protector, his compass, the person who made the world feel navigable. On November 13, 1990, Richie Shelton was killed in a car accident on a rural Oklahoma road. Blake was 14 years old. The boy who had just begun to understand who he was lost the person who had helped him believe he could become anything at all. The details were ordinary in the way that tragedies in small towns always are. A road, a collision, a phone call that split time into before and after. Blake would not speak publicly about the depth of that wound for years, burying it beneath melodies and one-liners and the relentless forward motion of a teenager who understood instinctively that if he stopped moving, the grief would swallow him whole. Years later, he would confess with a voice stripped of all performance. Losing my brother was the defining moment of my life. Everything I have done since then has been shaped by that loss. You do not get over it. You just learn to carry it. At 15, with the earth still fresh on his brother's grave, Blake won the Denbo Diamond Award, Oklahoma's top honor for young entertainers. It should have been a celebration. Instead, it was a lifeline, the only proof he had that the music pouring out of him might be strong enough to outrun the darkness gathering at his heels. His mother watched him accept that award with tears she did not try to hide, knowing her youngest son was not celebrating a victory, but clutching a piece of driftwood in an ocean of grief. For most teenagers, losing a sibling would have been the end of ambition, the collapse of direction. For Blake Shelton, it became the engine beneath everything that followed, a silent, furious refusal to let death have the last word. With nothing but a guitar, a demo tape, and the blessing of a mother who knew she could not keep him, Blake Shelton arrived in Nashville, Tennessee in 1994. He was 17 years old. He had $500 folded into the pocket of his jeans, a duffel bag with 3 changes of clothes, and the quiet, terrified certainty that if he did not leave Ada immediately, he would spend the rest of his life wondering what might have been. He had no contacts, no manager, no fallback plan. The only safety net he carried was the memory of his brother, and the unspoken promise he had made over a grave that he would not waste whatever time he had left. Nashville in the mid-90s was not kind to dreamers. It was a city already drowning in beautiful voices, already oversaturated with tall boys from small towns who could carry a tune and tell a story. The music industry machine had seen 10,000 Blake Sheltons walk through its doors, and it had chewed up 9,999 of them without so much as a second glance. The city did not welcome him with open arms. It welcomed him with indifference, which was worse. At least rejection acknowledges your existence. Indifference makes you wonder if you exist at all. He painted houses in the Tennessee heat until his hands cracked and bled. He worked in a warehouse stacking boxes until his back screamed. He picked up shifts wherever someone would pay him enough to cover rent on a room so small he could touch both walls with his arms outstretched. And every night, after the labor that was supposed to break him, he played. Open mic nights in bars where the audience talked over every note. Writers' rounds where no one remembered his name the next morning. Demo sessions that cost him a week's wages and led to nothing but silence from every label he approached. The rejections came with a consistency that bordered on cruel. Too country for pop, too modern for traditional, too tall, too goofy, too hard to categorize. One executive told him his voice was interesting, but unmarketable. Another said he should consider going back to Oklahoma and teaching music. For 2 years, Nashville offered him nothing but closed doors and the slow, grinding erosion of confidence that comes from being told, again and again, that the thing you believe makes you special is not special enough. There were nights when Nashville felt not like a city of dreams, but like a coffin with neon lights. Nights when the coins he counted on his mattress could not stretch to cover both food and rent, and he chose rent because you can sleep hungry, but you cannot sleep in the rain. Nights when he called his mother and said nothing for long stretches, just needing to hear someone breathe who loved him. He would later admit in an interview that cut through his usual deflections, "There were times I sat in that little apartment and thought, maybe everybody is right. Maybe I am just a kid from Ada who does not belong here." But in 1997, something shifted. Bobby Braddock, a legendary Nashville songwriter responsible for some of country music's most enduring hits, heard Blake sing at a showcase and recognized something the industry had been too busy to notice. Not just the voice, which was rich and distinctive and carried the dust of Oklahoma in every note, but the hunger behind it. The grief converted into melody. The boy who had buried a brother and refused to bury his own future. Braddock signed Blake to his publishing company and began the slow, painstaking work of turning raw talent into something Nashville could no longer ignore. It took 4 more years. 4 years of writing sessions that started at dawn and ended after midnight. 4 years of demo recordings and near misses and promises that evaporated like morning fog on the Cumberland River. 4 years during which Blake Shelton learned to transform his wound into his weapon, channeling the loss of Richie, the isolation of those early Nashville nights, and the stubborn fury of a man who had been told no so many times the word had lost all meaning. And when he finally stepped into a recording studio with Giant Records in 2001 to record his debut single, something extraordinary happened. The goofy kid from Ada disappeared. The grieving brother disappeared. The warehouse worker and house painter and open mic survivor disappeared. What remained was a voice so authentic it sounded like a confession, and a presence so commanding it filled the room like weather. Austin was released in 2001, and it did not just succeed, it detonated. The song spent 5 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot Country Singles chart, making Blake Shelton the first artist in years to reach the top spot with a debut single. It was not a novelty hit. It was not a gimmick. It was a love song delivered with such aching sincerity that it cut through the noise of an entire industry and made millions of strangers stop and listen. The boy who had arrived in Nashville with $500 and a dead brother's memory was suddenly the most talked about new voice in country music. And the wound that had driven him, the loss that had made silence unbearable, had finally found its echo in an audience that understood exactly what it meant to wait for someone who might never come back. But behind the platinum records and the sold-out tours and the easy smile that made America fall in love with him, something was beginning to crack. Success did not heal Blake Shelton. It amplified him. And when you amplify a man who has never properly grieved, who has never learned to sit still with his own pain, what you get is not a star. What you get is a spectacular, slow-motion unraveling disguised as a career. In 2003, Blake married Kynette Williams, his high school sweetheart from Ada. She had been there before Nashville, before the fame, before the industry reshaped him into something the cameras could consume. For a while, it looked like an anchor, a tether to the person he had been before the world started watching. But the marriage buckled under the weight of everything fame demands. The endless touring, the interviews, the industry events where everyone wants a piece of you and no one wants the real you. By 2006, after just 3 years, Kynette filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The details were private, but the failure was public, and Blake handled it the way he handled everything that hurt. He made a joke, he poured a drink, he wrote a song, and he kept moving. Then came Miranda Lambert. They met in 2005 at a CMT concert event, two of country music's brightest rising forces colliding with the kind of chemistry that makes good television and dangerous relationships. The attraction was immediate, electric, and entirely mutual. By 2011, they were married in a ceremony at the Don Strange Ranch in Boerne, Texas, surrounded by friends, family, and the kind of hope that only second chances can produce. For 4 years, they were country music royalty, the golden couple whose duets made audiences believe that broken people could build something beautiful together. But the price of living at that altitude of fame is brutal, and nobody warns you when you are climbing. The absences stretched longer. The schedules pulled them to opposite coasts. The tabloid speculation became a third presence in every room they shared. In July 2015, after 4 years of marriage, Blake and Miranda announced their divorce. The news detonated across every entertainment platform in the country within hours. The headlines were surgical in their cruelty. For the world, it was content. For Blake Shelton, it was the second collapse of something he had built with his own hands. The second time he had tried to construct a home and watched it come apart. And then the drinking, which had always been present, which had always been part of the persona, stopped being funny. Blake would later confess with a rawness that shocked even his closest friends, "I was drinking to the point where I was wondering if I even wanted to keep going." Not just with music, with everything. The jokes that had always been his shield became thinner. The laughter carried less conviction. The man who had made a career out of never appearing wounded was hemorrhaging in plain sight. And an entire industry watched without intervening because the performance was still convincing enough to sell tickets. His body was telling a parallel story. Years of relentless touring had carved their toll into his frame. Chronic back pain that woke him at 3 in the morning. Weight fluctuations that the tabloids documented with gleeful cruelty. The exhaustion of a man who had not stopped moving since he was 14 years old, because stopping meant feeling. And feeling meant remembering a brother who died on a dark Oklahoma road when the world was still supposed to be safe. By 2015, Blake Shelton was simultaneously one of the most famous men in America, a coach on The Voice commanding millions of viewers per episode, and a man standing in the wreckage of his personal life, wondering if any of it had been worth the cost. The fame had given him everything his childhood could not: financial security, recognition, a platform that amplified his voice to every corner of the country. But it had also stolen things no amount of money could replace. 2 marriages, his privacy, the simple, uncomplicated version of himself that had existed before Nashville learned his name. He would admit in a quiet moment, years later, "I looked around and realized I had all this success, and I was the most miserable I had ever been. I had become exactly what I was afraid of. A guy performing happiness he did not actually feel." But Blake Shelton had survived worse things than fame. He had survived a brother's funeral at 14. He had survived Nashville's indifference at 17. He had survived counting coins on a mattress in a city that did not care if he lived or disappeared. And somewhere beneath the wreckage of 2015, beneath the bourbon and the tabloid wounds and the silence of an empty house, the same stubborn refusal that had carried a grieving teenager out of Ada and into a recording studio began to stir again. Not as ambition this time, not as hunger, but as something quieter and far more dangerous. The slow, terrifying decision to stop performing happiness and start actually building it. The choice to put down the glass, look at the wound directly, and for the first time in 25 years, stop running from the ghost of a brother who had been waiting patiently for Blake to finally stand still. In late 2015, in the middle of the deepest personal crisis of his life, Blake Shelton met Gwen Stefani on the set of The Voice. She was navigating her own devastation, her own very public divorce from Gavin Rossdale, her own tabloid nightmare. Two broken people sitting in adjacent red chairs on a television set, performing composure for cameras while their private worlds burned. Neither was looking for love. Neither was ready. And perhaps that is precisely why it worked. Because for the first time in his adult life, Blake did not have to pretend he was fine. He found someone who already knew he was not. Their relationship unfolded slowly at first, then with a certainty that surprised everyone, including themselves. Gwen did not need Blake Shelton, the country star. She needed Blake Shelton, the man who understood what it felt like to watch your family dissolve in public. And Blake did not need Gwen Stefani, the pop icon. He needed someone who would sit with him in the silence without asking him to fill it with a joke. In July 2021, they married at Blake's ranch in Tishomingo, Oklahoma. A small ceremony with no industry spectacle, no red carpet performance, just two people who had earned their happiness the hard way, standing in the same Oklahoma wind that had shaped him since birth. Something shifted in Blake after that. The drinking slowed, then stopped. The frantic pace that had defined his career since 17 began to ease into something more intentional. In 2023, after 23 seasons as a coach on The Voice, Blake Shelton stepped away from the show that had introduced him to an entirely new generation of fans. It was not a retreat, it was a reclamation. The man who had spent his entire life running toward noise finally chose stillness. He returned to Tishomingo, to the small-town Oklahoma life he had left at 17, and began building something he had never allowed himself to have. A home that would last. His music reflected the transformation. Albums like Body Language and tracks like No Body showed an artist no longer chasing radio approval, but writing from a place of earned peace. The voice was the same, still carrying that unmistakable Oklahoma dust, but the desperation behind it had been replaced by something richer. Gratitude, perhaps. Or the quiet confidence of a man who had finally stopped trying to outrun his own story. In 2023, his continued touring proved that audiences did not want the performance of invincibility. They wanted the truth, and the truth was more compelling than the myth had ever been. Today, at 48 years old, Blake Shelton lives on his ranch in Tishomingo, Oklahoma, less than 100 miles from the town where he was born, the town where he buried his brother, the town he fled at 17 with $500 and a grief he could not name. He raises Gwen's 3 sons as his own. He fishes in ponds that reflect the same wide Oklahoma sky he stared at as a child. Every morning he wakes in a place he chose, not a place the industry assigned him. And every morning, whether he acknowledges it or not, he carries the memory of Richie Shelton in the quiet way that survivors carry their dead. Not as a weight, but as a compass. The cost was not small. 2 failed marriages that played out under the merciless gaze of public consumption. A battle with alcohol that nearly consumed him. A grief he carried for decades without ever fully setting it down. A body worn by 30 years of relentless performing. A privacy he will never fully recover. He once admitted with the kind of honesty that only comes from the other side of desperation, "I would not change any of it, because all of it brought me here. But I would be lying if I said none of it left a mark." And yet Blake Shelton remained standing. Not as the invincible country giant the industry manufactured, not as the class clown who deflected every wound with a punchline, but as the man who finally understood that real strength is not the absence of breaking. It is the willingness to let people see you broken, and to rebuild anyway. His legacy is not the #1 hits, though there are dozens. It is not the voice, though it made him a household name. It is the living, breathing proof that you can lose the person who mattered most, survive the years of wandering that follow, and still find your way back to a place that feels like home. From the grieving boy in Ada to the man who walked away from the biggest stage in television to plant his boots back in Oklahoma soil, Blake Shelton's story is not about fame. It is about the long, winding, painful road back to yourself. It is proof that the wounds we carry do not disqualify us from joy. They are the very things that teach us to recognize it when it finally arrives. What lesson do you take from Blake Shelton's journey? How many times have you kept moving when everything inside you begged you to stop? Share your reflections below and subscribe for more stories of those who transformed their deepest scars into something the world could not forget. Because in the end, as Blake himself taught us, you do not outrun grief. You do not outlast it. You simply learn, after enough miles and enough years and enough silence, to build a life wide enough to hold it.